Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunworks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
Well, we're back on with another kind of rapid-fire episode here. We're talking suppressors again. We touched on kind of some of the science behind suppressors and how they affect your rifle's performance. I want to talk a little bit about the shooting experience with suppressors. We got Mac back on. He's our suppressor engineer, plus lots of other things. But, you know, I think it's easy for us to just kind of focus or fixate on, okay, a suppressor makes my gun quieter, and so it's protecting my ears, my hearing, right? And we've all probably grew up shooting without ear pro. I'm sure I've done so much damage over the years. You know, it was never a thing to even have earplugs when we went shooting when I was a kid. And it's kind of mind-blowing to even think about. But, you know, hopefully most of us have moved past that and we're at least using ear pro. And probably by now, a lot of us are starting to think about, okay, it's definitely worth the investment to get a suppressor. So yeah, that's the obvious thing, right? It's less loud. And so I can either, you know, take a quick shot on deer running over the hill and not worry about completely blowing out my ears, or I can hit the range and it's just way less percussion and muzzle blast coming back at me. It's better for my kids shooting suppressors. You know, they're not developing flinches like I did as a kid shooting. But there's quite a few other effects there that I think get glossed over or ignored when shooting suppressed that I think are worthy of consideration. Any other thoughts there, Mac, on what?
Oh, sorry, I just lost it.
Oh, you're good. You know, I think the one big thing, and I've got stories here, right? When growing up, we didn't even have braked rifles, right? I mean, I'm shooting old Winchesters and whatever else, just a clean crown on that rifle, and so they were loud. But when I graduated to some of these long-range guns where we were putting big brakes on guns to reduce recoil, I did not realize how much louder those guns were. And I can just remember those first couple of years hunting with a couple buddies when we started getting, we can reach out to 500 yards or whatever else. Forgetting to put ear pro in a couple times when things get exciting on the hill. And I mean, literally your ears are ringing for days after, a couple, 3 quick shots trying to knock something down. And we're doing like legitimate, measurable, permanent hearing damage doing that. And I can just remember sitting next to a buddy, right? You're maybe 3 or 4 feet over to the right, spotting for him when he's shooting, and you're catching even more of that muzzle blast than he is because he's back behind the rifle. Those baffles are directed right out to the spotter. So actually the spotter's getting the worst of the deal.
Right.
That we don't really even a lot of times think about.
Right.
We've probably all been at a range where some guy shows up with some huge hand cannon and starts blasting away, and it's like, knocking the retinas loose in your eyeballs kind of stuff.
But
right?
While we're on this, we should probably touch on, dispel that myth of it's not John Wick, it's not the movies, right?
You're not getting absolute pew-pew type silence, right?
Just because you threw a suppressor on doesn't make your firearm hearing safe.
Right.
At the end of the day. I mean, and through the sound testing we've done, we see a whole lot of competitor cans that are, you fire a hunting caliber through some of these cans, and they are not hearing safe.
Right.
Not even close.
I think that's a good point. That in what I'm kind of learning, being relatively new to this, but diving into a little bit of the science of it, is hearing safe as a term is a little bit of a misnomer and kind of a myth. I think that probably comes from an OSHA standard, and I want to say, like, everybody kind of sticks their finger on that 140 decibels mark that probably comes from OSHA. But what I understand is repetitive loud noises, almost no matter what, beyond it's not a not safe here and safe there kind of thing. It's a sliding scale, right?
Right.
And so, any of us shooting suppressors more than a, hop out of the truck and shoot a coyote kind of thing, generally when you go to the range, you're still wanting to put ear pro on because it's significantly less loud, but it's still loud.
Right.
And, you know, a day at the range with a suppressor and no ear pro is still doing damage to your ears.
And that OSHA standard you mentioned, actually, the way they term it is that it's a certain decibel level for a period of time.
Right.
For an hour.
Okay.
They're not, you know, that is not a standard for sharp spikes
Right.
in decibel level.
It's simply way more complicated than that, right? And
it is.
And it's just, it's too complicated to really put just a simple number on.
Right. Yeah. And I will tell you, I have seen cans out there today. There is some, you know, innovations in suppressor technology going on today. I have found cans that are well under the the level that would give you hearing damage.
Right.
But those are few and far between at this point.
Right.
You know, 95% of the cans on the market, if you're shooting a hunting caliber, a 30 cal or similar through it, it's not hearing safe.
Yeah. And the dirty little secret is you'll see a rating, but that rating doesn't often really mean very much because you put it on a different gun, you shoot different ammo, the humidity in the air is different. You know, you're under a carport versus out in the open. Like it all changes things. And so that number is almost never replicated in a real world scenario.
Right. And I never trust it if somebody's actually speccing that, you know, this is a sub 135 decibel can. It's a little more believable when people say, you know, this is a 30 decibel reduction.
Yeah.
But you get the same problem, you know, a 30 decibel reduction in what?
Yeah.
In which caliber,
Exactly.
in which barrel?
Right. What powder are you burning for
Exactly.
that matter, right? The burn rate of the powder probably makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. And I think that kind of segues into, that wasn't really kind of where we're going with this, but I think it's worth mentioning is that we get so fixated on one specification for a product, right? And it's easy. A suppressor is supposed to make my gun quieter, so what's the quietest suppressor? I'm going to buy that one. But there's so many other features and aspects to a suppressor that make it either the right or maybe less right choice for your application and for your gun and for your use case, that I think I would encourage people to be a little bit more open-minded to when they're buying a suppressor and not just get fixated on that decibel number, because that decibel number probably isn't actually very relevant.
Right. And this is where you have a little bit of disconnect between the military community and the hunting community.
Right.
You know, those military guys, any can designed for the military is going through mil-spec trials.
Yeah.
And those trials are more looking for signature reduction as a whole.
Sure. Right.
You know, that's
Muzzle
the guys
flash
around you,
and
muzzle
other things.
flash, concussion to the shooter.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, in the forums online, the hunting communities, most of what you hear is sound suppression is king. They want a quieter shooting rifle.
Right. But, you know, we go to the range, we're putting on ear pro anyway. So the difference between a decibel here and a decibel there really doesn't make that much difference. And I would say the same thing, you are out elk hunting and you take one or two shots a year at game, right, without ear pro. And in the scheme of things, 1 or 2 decibel up or down really is not going to make a difference there for you or for the animal that you're shooting at. But a lot of those other features involved in that may come into play. So it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
It's, you know, sure, suppression level matters, but don't forget about the other things when you're shopping for a suppressor.
Exactly. It's not just sound at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. I want to touch on another piece that I think gets overlooked as far as just the concept of let's put a suppressor on a gun and make it quieter, right? And a little bit more nuanced, but you know, one thing for me, it's like I'm probably like a lot of guys. I don't like to tell people where I hunt, right? And so I don't necessarily love the idea of shooting a big loud gun and announcing, "Oh, hey, I just killed a deer over the ridge from you," right? And it's funny how you get out into the big open mountains, and I've had buddies. You know, you'll split up and one's hunting one side of the ridge and one's hunting the other side of the ridge, and I don't even know he shot a deer until, you know, I meet him back at camp or he radios me or whatever else and said, "Hey, I got something down over here. Can you come help me?"
Right.
So it's amazing how little that sound travels. I mean, it's still relatively loud nearby, but I can't even explain the science of that, but you move 50 yards away and it's exponentially quieter. You move 200 yards away and sometimes you can hardly even hear it, especially with a little bit of wind going, where, an unsuppressed rifle shot will travel 5 miles out there in the hills. So anyway, something to think about, and it's not just that. It's you're at a range that's maybe a half mile out of town, and there's a lot of noise pollution there. That's a consideration as well.
And that's actually maybe a reason to look into mil-spec cans, because that mil-spec trial, they are actually looking into how far sound propagates.
Interesting.
And whereas the hunting community, I mean, there's
not really a consideration in that.
There's really 2 set standards. There's an ASA standard where the microphone is placed 45 degrees back, 6 feet from the muzzle.
Right.
And there's another standard, I forget the name, where it's 6 feet directly over from the muzzle.
Yeah.
Those are the standard 2. Nobody in the hunting industry is really tracking sound propagation over distance.
Right.
So if that's really a concern for people out there, then anything that's gone through mil-spec trials will have more information on that. Things like the RC2 can is a great one.
Interesting. I mean, I admit that it's probably significantly lower on our list than it probably is for some of the military guys. So it's maybe for good reason not gotten a lot of attention, but it probably is not worth at least not overlooking.
Right, and that's not to say that there aren't hunting cans out there that have good sound suppression over long distances.
Just maybe not been paid attention to.
Right, there's just not good data for it.
Yeah. Okay, I think the other big thing here, and this is not often talked about, but I think it's a huge deal, is the effect on our game. And I don't know how many animals you killed with suppressor, but I mean, has your experience been when you shoot deer or elk with a suppressor?
I've never shot anything with a suppressor.
You haven't?
I have not.
What?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, we need to change that.
I know.
So I've observed this over and over again, and I think what it is you've got 2 elements to the sound that a rifle makes, right? You've got the crack of the muzzle, or the muzzle blast, I guess you should say, right? And the sonic crack of the bullet as it's traveling through the air. The muzzle blast is coming from the end of your bore. That sonic crack is propagating all the way from there to the impact of the bullet, right? It's coming sourced from the bullet itself.
Exactly.
Right? And so when those animals are, 2, 4, 500, 800 yards down range, by the time you've essentially eliminated the muzzle blast from the rifle, all they're hearing is the crack of the bullet. And that's coming kind of just out of the ether almost.
Exactly. It's the bullet breaking the sound barrier.
Yeah. Right? And so I've watched these animals time and time again where they just don't know where it's coming from, and it doesn't really seem to affect them much. It's almost like you've probably been sitting glassing on a rock and had a bird like buzz by your head 100 miles an hour, and you're like, what was that? And then, it was a bird, Right. It's almost like that. They just kind of jump and look, and then they're back to normal. And, I think what the effect is there is that you're not having animals run 300 yards into the trees bleeding and disappear. You're not having to track animals nearly as far, if at all. They'll typically just lay down there and die because there's nothing to run from.
Right, and it makes sense. I mean, if you can get that muzzle crack, as laminar as possible, really all you're looking for is the crack of the bullet, like you were saying, to be the more noticeable thing to whatever you're shooting.
Yeah.
Right, so, I mean, if they hear a soft thud off in the distance and then hear that bullet ripping in, they're not thinking about that thud they heard way off.
Right.
They're thinking about whatever just ripped by them.
Yeah.
So it helps conceal your shooting position really well.
Right.
That sound suppression at the muzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. I think back to a few years ago, hunting with some friends in Colorado, and we had a couple elk tags. Mostly deer hunting, but there's deer and elk seasons going on at once, and we found a nice little elk herd, and we're able to take 2 bulls out of that herd, one after the other, rather than trying to set up 2 guns and 1, 2, 3 fire, and one gets hit and one gets gut shot and whatever else. It was literally shoot one bull, he tips over dead. The other one's like, what's wrong with Jimmy over there? Mm-hmm. You shoot get the other guy gets behind the same gun. It's dialed. It's confirmed wind call, everything. Shoot the next one. it's just it works. And I seems like you hear a lot of stuff about fair chase these days, and I guess I'd be kind of curious to hear what some of the conservation organizations feel about that. I guess I could see someone claiming that it's not fair chase because they're not given the chance to run away. I don't see that, because we're out there to hunt and to take an animal cleanly.
Exactly.
Right? And the alternative there is two of us lining up and trying to pot shoot, and you've seen it. It always goes south when people are trying to hunt multiple animals out of a herd. Like it's
goes south
inevitable.
fast. Yeah.
Right? It's like, how is that more ethical than cleanly taking two animals out of a herd and being done with it?
Right. Not only cleanly, but with tighter groups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the more humane option for sure.
Absolutely. Anyway, that's just my little soapbox there.
Oh, I agree.
I'd be curious what other people have to say about it. But anyway, so that's kind of the sound effects on suppressors. I think it's definitely the big takeaway there is it's not Hollywood quiet, but it is still very much worth adding to your arsenal if you don't already have one.
It is. If you can stand the weight, everything else, really worth the headache at the end of the day.
Yeah. And if weight's a concern, titanium's always an option.
Exactly.
It's 40% lighter. We'll probably touch on that on another episode here coming up soon. So, until next time.
Thanks, Landon.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram or send us an email to podcast@gunworks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunworks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.